Just a quick disclaimer for today's podcast. Our guest, Dr. Geoff Wilson, mentions that he's going to meet up with Russians.
Oh, controversial.
So this was actually recorded a couple of days before Russia decided to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So when he starts talking about hanging out with the Russians, he now actually means that he'll be hanging out with Canadians.
Yes. And when he's talking about Russia, he's now talking about Canada.
And when he's talking about drinking vodka with the Russians, he now means that he'll be drinking Tim Hortons with Canadians. I hope we've cleared all that up.
I think that's good. We're good to roll.
How you doing today?
I'm very good. You?
Good. You feeling adventurous?
Always.
Today's guest is massive adventurer, and I'm surprised that this guy is not more well known. He will become like the Burke and Wills of our time.
Not too dissimilar to myself.
Sitting on your ass and drinking beer does not entitle you to get into the history books. This guy will get into the history books.
The Brown Podcast.
So what's the most adventurous thing you've ever done?
In what
in life?
Most adventurous thing I've done.
And this is based on our guest today.
Legal or illegal? Let's run with the legal one.
Let's go with legal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say when I was 18 and I was surfing Kira in the cyclone swell, that would be probably the most adventurous thing that I've done, and the thing that I was most scared of whilst I was doing it.
How big was it?
I think it was like 8 foot or 10 foot or something like that. So it was decent size. I was 18. My how do I put it? My skill was far lower than my expectations of my skill. So
I want to introduce our guest today because he's an absolute legend and he will go down in history books. He's set the world record for things. I just want to read you some of his stats. Okay, and be prepared to be amazed, right? The longest solo unsupported polar journey in human history of Antarctica. The first summit of Dome Argus, solo and unsupported. The fastest solo unsupported crossing of Antarctica. The fastest unsupported crossing of Greenland south to north. Look, there's so many things that you've done, Geoff, but I just wanted to get you on the show and have a chat. Geoff Wilson, thanks for joining us.
Awesome, mate. You've been very patient and dogged. You've shown resilience getting me on here.
Not as much as you.
But every Australian this year has shown a bit of resilience, I think, just to be still standing. So every bit of resilience we have is going to be called upon.
Now, we've got you here because you have done some crazy batshit things, and we've spoken about this before, but what has made you, or what has given you the adventurous spirit that has made you do these things?
And do you hate people, which is why you do them?
No, the funny thing, I do love people, but I do like solitude as well, and I think COVID has taught me even more so that the way that I'm wired is wilderness orientated. I get very edgy in suburbia. I get edgy in big cities. So I'm definitely from a young age wired for wilderness stuff. So, but, where the extreme adventuring sort of comes from is just an exploration of what the human mind and the human body can endure and put up with. And I think I like people too much to make them do the stupid things that I want to do. So often I end up doing them solo, because then you're not brutalising someone else. But, you'd think at 51 I would grow up and put my boots up, but I've just signed with the Russians to train with them on the Arctic ice in April, COVID allowing, for another completely impossible journey, trying to do the first Australian Arctic crossing. This is probably the first time I've actually spoken about it openly, because I don't like talking about stuff until I'm sure it can be done. Yeah. So this journey is going to be super exciting because it's the first one I've done for an animal rather than a person. So all of our other journeys have been to raise funds for a human charity. This one is just for the polar bear, just to raise awareness of the plight of the polar bear. And if we don't change what we're doing, we won't have them by 2050.
Let's go back to the Arctic crossing, because that was a hard journey for you, wasn't it?
The Antarctic, yeah, that was absolutely brutal. Like I think, during that journey, I was worried that something had changed in me, that I wasn't doing as well mentally. I was breaking down more physically, emotionally, spiritually. And, before the end of the first leg of 7 different legs, I felt done in and, ready for extraction for the first time in my life. But when I got home and looked at the wind chill chart, because I didn't have a wind chill chart with me, I was operating in a wind chill of close to minus 88 to 95 below Celsius for 17 days straight. And you kind of give yourself a break and go, okay, yeah, that's pretty shit. Like humans meant to operate outside a tent in that sort of wind chill, climbing, pulling 220 kilos of load uphill in deep snow. That's not what you're meant to be doing, especially, north of 40, where you're in this dangerous age in your late 40s.
And what keeps you pushing in those moments where you think, holy shit, I've screwed up on this one. This might have been a bad idea. That in the first leg, how do you keep pushing on when you're so early into a big trip like that? How do you mentally get over this scenario you're in and keep driving forward?
Yeah, it's a super good question. I think it's just making sure that every minute, every hour, you're trying to work out, am I just suffering or am I seeing the first of what I call a domino? So a domino is where you ignore something falling badly for you, like some bad luck. It might be that you've damaged your hand or your face, or the stove didn't work that morning and you haven't quite drunk enough water for the day. That's a domino that you need to stop, correct, get that domino back up. If you miss 2 or 3 dominoes and then suddenly you're in a situation where things are out of your control, you can die very quickly there. So determining whether, okay, am I suffering or have I missed a domino, that's kind of all-consuming in that environment, especially when you're solo and you don't have someone to look at you and say, hey, your face is exposed, it's gone black, or your speech is slurred, I think you need to slow down. When you're relying on yourself entirely, you're constantly analysing that, and that fills a lot of time. And then suddenly you realise, shit, I'm on day 3 here, I froze my hand on day 2, I've still made mileage, let's take the wins and have an 8-hour sleep and eat well tonight and give yourself a bit of a treat. And so you're in this life and death struggle day to day and constantly assessing where you think you're going to tap out. So in that first week, I was like, if I get to the pole of inaccessibility, I'll be lucky. So you bring all your goals back. Okay, let's slow it down. Then if that's the only goal I'm going to get, then let's not be quite so precious about the daily mileage. I've got 90 days food on board. I'm only on day 3, 4. Let's slow it down and just chew up little pieces. And I think that applies for people in COVID crisis at the moment, where instead of going, I had all these plans for my life, none of them are possible, just break it down to what's your nearest goal that you can get to and just focus on that. Forget about all the other stuff. Like, it may or may not happen, but break it down. And then suddenly day 17, I see Lenin's statue on the horizon and realise, wow, I'm the only Aussie that's ever made this journey solo unsupported. And here we are, day 17, and then 2 days rest there, and suddenly you start thinking, I might get to the South Pole again. And then you reset your goals. So I think it's just that constant making sure that you're not missing dominoes and then bringing your goals back to something that's achievable.
Does the name, the point of inaccessibility, not put you off at all?
Well, no, because
do you not sit there and go, you know what, it's inaccessible, so I'm just not going to do it?
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's that point that is most difficult to get to on the Antarctic plateau. And the Arctic's the same. Like, no human, amazingly, it's 2022 and no human has made it on foot or ski from any coastline to the northern pole of inaccessibility. So for me, that's an Everest that still hasn't been climbed.
See, that's what blew my mind when I started reading your story, that you actually use a kite. Essentially, you're kite surfing across the Arctic, yeah? So the kite just pulls you across the ice and you're just holding on to get across the distance, yeah?
Yeah, because the distance on that last journey, Dion, was 5,300 kilometres. So you couldn't physically walk that in one Antarctic summer, which would mean to get as far into the interior as the polar inaccessibility and then get home, you wouldn't make it back to the coast in time. So you would struggle to do that distance, and then the bases would shut for the winter and you'd freeze to death in the dark, temperatures down to minus 20 Celsius, 120 Celsius, below. So you're not going to survive a winter in a tent there. So the kites were essential to get in and get out in one Antarctic summer so that you could do the distance. And I think the unique thing with my journeys are that, there's probably with the death of Dixie Danzakura last year, who was a mentor of mine and a bit of a hero. He stepped into a crevasse in Greenland last year, just a fatigue sort of related thing. I would say he was probably the only guy who'd done more distance than me on, sand, ice, and ocean, using kites for traction. So that, that combination of thousands of kilometres means that we can apply them in environments you just wouldn't traditionally think of. And I'm hoping that I can learn how to use them in the Arctic, because Antarctica's great for kiting in that you've got solid ice. It doesn't move. The Arctic, the ice is moving while you're travelling on it. It cracks, it opens up. You can fall through it into the Arctic Ocean and drown. So we've got to find different ways of doing it.
Not doing it?
Yeah, that is definitely an option, Christo, and that's the whole point of getting up there. The Russians know that area so well because it's their whole Siberian coastline back. It's their backyard. So to train with them will be a real honour. And I like the Russian attitude because they don't ever say it can't be done. They'll just tell you how much vodka it requires to get it done. And as long as we keep the vodka flowing,
we'll
get permissions and get it happening. But they're tough, man. Honestly, if they say it can't be done, then it probably can't be done.
Was there a point in any of these adventures that you've done, or accomplishments, I think I should say, not adventures, but accomplishments, that you thought, it's all over, I'm dead?
Listen, we could fill a book. I think at last count there was up around 10 or 12 near-death experiences. So you're kind of at that point where I try and not have them as regularly, because I think when you're a younger adventurer, you tend to go in, like a bull in the china shop and a bullet wings past your ear, metaphorically, and you sit down around the campfire that night or in the tent and go, wow, that could have gone either way. Let's try and not do that again. And definitely the gap between incidences is getting longer as I get wiser, but there was a period of 3 or 4 years there where 2 or 3 times a year it could have gone the other way. And the irony is one of those was a bear itself. So to be doing a journey now for the polar bear, when it was his cousin, the Kodiak bear, that nearly killed myself and my son in Alaska in 2017. We had a full-on bear charge and, miraculous escape from this huge bear, like I'd say 350 kilo bear. And he still keeps me awake. Out of all the near-death experiences, I think he probably visits me more than most, but it's kind of ironic that we're now stepping in the gap for one of his cousins.
So how does that mean? so you're walking through Alaska, and I'm assuming it's one of those brown bears you're talking about. So what happened? How does that happen?
Well, how it didn't happen sooner is kind of what the miracle is, because we got airlifted into a place called Summit Lake, which is right up the top of the Brooks Range. So if you imagine Alaska's like a big finger heading towards Russia, and the spine is the Brooks Range. In winter, it's all ice and snow and crevasses and, very, very dangerous. In summer, it's full of mosquitoes and you get bled to death by these 1 inch sort of long mozzies. Not a pleasant place to be. So we were there just after the ice melt and the rivers were absolutely swollen. The idea was that we would land by aircraft, seaplane on the Summit Lake, pump up these 2 inflatable kayaks, and then kayak about 600 kilometres back to civilization. So the town we were heading towards is called Battles, which is the northernmost town on the planet, most northernmost. So arguably one of the most whacked out kind of isolated communities on the planet. And that was the end point for the journey. So we lost communication. I rolled the kayak and flooded the sat phone on day 2. From there, things went steadily downhill, and then day 10 had this incident with the bear where we came around a bend in a river, and he stood up about 40 metres from the bank, and I realised, man, that's a big bear. And he just charged full tilt, absolute full tilt. I had my son Kit behind me. He was 17 at the time, and I'm thinking, this bear won't swim, like he'll just run. He's trying to scare us off. So we'll just hold our ground, because they stress as you enter the park, they say never run from the bear. Like, hold your ground, make yourself big, make a lot of noise, fire a flare or bear spray at him.
Oh, I would have sprayed. Don't worry.
Yeah, different kind of spray. But he was on us so quick. There's no, even if you had a Colt 45 at your hip, you wouldn't have got it out of your holster before he was on you. Anyway, he hit the water doing about 45k an hour, and then surfed on his chest, the gap between us, and then just stuck about 10 feet from the end of the kayak. And he did this big exhale. I smelled sort of berries and fish combo, and he just looked stunned. It looked like a Labrador that ran into a plate glass window on the veranda. Something stopped him. And talking to people who, who've lived up there, they said, listen, the bear will either fake charge, or he'll run and then present himself side on so he looks big and scary, or he will kill. Anyway, we lived to see another day, but it meant sleeping in the tent for the next 3 nights. Pretty awkward. You know that these guys are out there, and you're only a thin bit of canvas away.
This is the Brown Park Podcast. Now, a word from our sponsors. This is the Brown Park Podcast with Christo and Dion.
The journeys that you've been on are just incredible. What's the standout moment for you out of everything that you've done?
I think probably, obviously because it's the most recent, but the summiting of Dome Argus was always a really high risk move, because like basically you travel to the Polar Inaccessibility, and then you go for another 1,300 kilometres into the wilderness, and then you climb to nearly 14,000 feet. The air temperature on a good day is about minus 55 Celsius. You can't breathe. Your fingers and toes are becoming frostbitten very easily because there's no oxygen in the air, because at the poles the air is thinner anyway. So 14,000 feels like 18,000 feet. You realise that if you make a mistake in the last couple of 100k, nobody can get to you, because if they land an aircraft next to you, it won't take off because the air's too thin. So they never get there by air. They generally land at the base and then truck people up. So you don't have time. And as you're getting more and more remote, you realise as your chances of a turnaround are more and more slim. You make a mistake up there and you're not coming home. And then 120 kilometres from the top, I just couldn't move. It had taken me 30 hours over 2 days to cover 4 kilometres, pulling one sled forward in really sticky glue like snow, and then going back for the second sled, 15 hours to cover 2 kilometres, sleep the night, and then do it again the next day. And then realising with that amount of energy expended, I couldn't go forward, I couldn't go back. And I rang Sarah at home on the sat phone and just said, listen, I think this might be one journey too far. I'm broken down emotionally, physically, I can't go forward. And she just said something which I think will stick with me till my last breath. She just said, listen, I know you feel you're done, but you never make a good decision when you're done. Double your calories, sleep 8 hours, and let's talk in the morning. And before I went to bed, I dug a trench outside, jammed a ski pole with a yellow ribbon in it, and the wind was the other side to the trench. I needed the yellow ribbon in the trench to line up in the morning to have perfect wind to get me to the top. And I just dug this trench as almost like an act of fate going in the morning. I want that yellow ribbon over the trench. And I didn't trust my brain to do any navigational sort of readings or even get a bearing on a compass because you're so fatigued and emotionally done in. Anyway, I did what Sarah suggested and ate a double ration that night and then set the alarm for 8 hours when I'd been sleeping anywhere from 2 to 4 hours for weeks. And anyway, slept a full night, woke up, felt the tent flapping slightly and unzipped the fly on the tent and could see the yellow ribbon over the trench. And just, it was like this electric cattle prod going, it is physically impossible to get katabatic wind going uphill. So you wind in Antarctica always rolls from altitude downhill because that's what cold air does. When you open the fridge, you feel that cold air on there, on your feet coming out. So it's physically impossible to get wind going uphill. So this mad panic ensues. I pack the sleds, get up, put a kite up, and away we go. 22 hours later, I'm on the top of Dome Argus. And I think dropping that kite for the last time, realising, a lot of people in the know in polar circles felt it was, potentially a suicide mission, that last bit of the journey, that it wouldn't be possible. I'd end up creating a rescue situation that would be very difficult to pull out. So that feeling of joy, dropping the kite going, okay, from here, no matter what happens, I can get to the coast using katabatic wind going downhill. There's nothing, higher than this point. I'm getting home. I would say that's probably, one of my adventure highlights. And it was more about going, okay, if you've risked it all and you've lost it all, that's a tragedy. But when you've risked it all and you realise, hey, this could come off, that's a real joy.
I've always wondered, so you go that far in that direction, you get there, then how the hell do you get back home? So you've just explained it well there that the wind flows in the direction where you can get home, because I've always thought, okay, what if you go 5,000 k's that direction, but how the heck do I get back?
And that was the amazing thing, because if you imagine that the Earth is rotating, Dion, when you're looking at it from the underside, I was coming home using the Coriolis effect, which is if you spin a planet, the air on the surface of the planet actually appears to move. It's not actually moving, it's the planet moving under it. So as the planet was spinning every day, I was putting my kite in that airflow and getting dragged back to my starting point. So I don't know of a journey that's used the Coriolis effect to that degree to get home, because
wow, it
was the only way I could get home was to use that rotation of the air and the very light air that happens when you use it. So yeah, it was an amazing journey from a navigational point of view as well.
With global warming and the ice caps melting, are these trips getting easier to do and in less distance now they're melting?
Well, it's really interesting. Antarctica is a bit of an enigma, and the naysayers use it, to excuse the fact that parts of Antarctica were actually getting more ice, but other parts were getting a lot less ice, and most parts were getting more unstable ice. So there's a massive glacier called the Teton Glacier, which if it discharged, the Gold Coast would become a water park, overnight. So this glacier is the size of New South Wales. Like, it is massive. And what we're finding is when you drill into the body, it's not just that the edge of the glacier is carving into the ocean at more regular intervals. There's moisture between the glacier and the rock body underneath. So that moisture acts like a lubricant, and we're getting accelerated movement. But within the body of the glacier are huge lakes, the size of, Lake Superior in the US. So if that water reaches the carbon point, you'll get a massive sea level rise in there. So there's all sorts of talk of an international attempt to drill into these lakes and then to pump that water onto the top of Antarctica to reseed it as ice, so that there's no chance of those lakes reaching the ocean. So there's a lot of stuff in there that, the general public probably isn't aware of the research yet there's a lot of work to be done to understand it. But, you know, from a polar explorer point of view, I've seen it firsthand. This last season, waiting to get extracted from Antarctica, it was melting under my feet. I've never seen anything like it. It was quite distressing just seeing water pouring down into the ocean.
I have one more question for you, and it's something that we discussed off air. In those kind of temperatures, where do you go to the bathroom? Like, I feel like we have to get this question answered.
Hey, Geoff, before you answer, I assume it's like when you're surfing, you need to you go in your pants and it keeps you warm.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a good idea long term in a polar environment. You'd get some serious chafing, I would say. But yeah, it's funny because you end up, because it's so serious, you tend to get a fairly rhythmic procession in your body. You're also eating really simple food regularly, and so you tend to work like clockwork. So basically try and get up in the morning and do your business in the vestibule of the tent. So you dig a little ice hole like a cat, and away you go. If you're caught out in the wilds, then you get to damage parts of your body. Minus 50, it would not take more than 90 seconds with an exposed gooch to run into some trouble.
Well, it's good to know. Good to know. I think that's been the most poignant question you've asked all show, Christo. Very good.
I had to ask it.
All about dreaming big and planning well.
I was going to say that's the motto on your website, and that's definitely what you do. It's dream big, plan well. Dr. Geoff Wilson, thank you very much for joining us on the show, and best of luck with your Arctic adventure, and we hope to chat to you when you get back.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you get onto Dr. Geoff Wilson on Instagram, GEOFF, then as we develop this journey, you'll be able to look at the tech come through and then get updates from the Arctic.
All right, mate. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Geoff.
Thank you. See you guys. Bye.
The Brown Podcast.
Why are you happy?
Because I don't want to be sad.